Again, face-to-face with Jack Warner. Today is a special edition. Yesterday was Basdev Pandey. Today you have Ramesh Maraj, the true and only AG this country ever had. I would want to make sure that you don't miss it, so I want to give you very early Ramesh Maraj.
Good afternoon, Mr. Maraj.
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon.
Thank you for having us here, taking this meeting. I know you're very busy. You see outside is packed. I appreciate taking time out of your day to have us.
Pleasure.
Right. First of all, I'm going to start off first by trying to get to know you a little bit, because our audience are a little bit within this century.
Okay.
So they may not be familiar with a lot of the stuff that you have put out there. I hear you on the radio, you make fantastic points, but they may not know the level of knowledge that's behind those points that's being made on the radio. So if you may, just enlighten us a little bit about Mr. Maraj.
Well, I was a school teacher, primary school teacher, and then I decided to study law. I went to London, England in 1965 as a very young man. You may not have been around by then. And I studied law. I practiced in England for a while. I came back to Trinidad. When I came back to Trinidad, however, I became very involved in making the law give justice to poor people, to the underprivileged, to those who could not afford. And therefore, as a young man, I took up several cases for the underdog, if I call it that. And the legal reports and the law reports are filled with those cases, whether it was a Rasta man who had his hair should not be cut, and some of the causes were very unpopular, but I took them up. And as a young lawyer, after 7 years in practice, I got into difficulties with a judge for standing up for justice. There were poor people who lost their homes in a fire at Texaco on the banks of the Guacara River because there was a fire with the oil in the river. They lost everything. And I took up a case, I filed it for them. And there was a state of emergency for a few weeks, and the judge dismissed their case without a hearing. Well, I got very annoyed because I felt as if the judge had done me an injustice. And I went before the judge and I told him that what he did was unjudicial. And he jailed me for contempt of court. And he sent and said if I came and apologized to him, he would rescind the order. And I sent back a message and said if I come before him, I'll ask for 21 days instead. And that, I fought that matter. I fought the system in Trinidad and Tobago. I lost in Trinidad and Tobago, but I won the two matters before the Privy Council in London, in which the Privy Council set aside the conviction, and then the next case they gave me damages. I took the money and I started the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau on Human Rights. And I used to go all over the country with different groups, informing and educating the people about their rights. And then I became very involved in very controversial cases, but there are many cases that become landmark decisions.
You said the judge offered you jail time, and you said you took 21 days. So did you go to jail?
Oh yes, I served 7 days simple imprisonment.
How was that?
Serving the imprisonment was very difficult at the time because I was a young man. I just had my wife. We just had a young baby, and I had to leave all of this. But I decided that I was doing it for a cause, because if I had apologized to a judge, every lawyer would have had to apologize for standing up for injustice. And the story became very popular in the Commonwealth. The legal correspondent of the London Times, Marcel Berlins, came to Trinidad, and there was a book written, Barrister Behind Bars. And that case is now a landmark decision throughout the Commonwealth, reported in all the law reports. You see, lawyers are not only persons to make money in the courts. Lawyers have a greater role. Their duty is to help the society to understand the law and to stand up. They should stand between the people and oppression. And that is the duty of a lawyer, and that is how I saw my role. That is why I became very independent, very fearless in discharging my duties as a lawyer. I stood up for very unpopular causes in Trinidad. For example, when the Jamaat al-Muslimin case came about, I did not back down. I appeared for them. And because I felt very strongly that if an amnesty was granted by a government, the government cannot disown the amnesty. And we ultimately won in the Privy Council. And there are many cases in Trinidad and Tobago which, for example, the maxi taxis in Port of Spain, they were told by the government, move from your taxi stand, go to Citygate, you'll be able to manage Citygate. Then the government back, withdrew that promise, and we had to go up to London, and they got their justice, and I could go on and on.
And that's exactly why we're here, Mr. Maraj. We need your insight to help educate the younger ones on what's happening in this election time. Because it is election time, and we're going to have this side saying that side saying this, and the actual information may be lost in the translation. Since you have been a governor for the poor people, in champion justice and best practices, shine some light on this government. Shine some light on, if I'm a young person, how should I interpret everything that I'm hearing you? Let's start with Section 34. Is it really that bad? Is it what they're saying, or is it maybe just hot air that's being blown?
Well, I have become very outspoken against this administration, although it is UNC. I assisted the UNC. I was very close to Mr. Pandey, and in 1991 I became involved in the UNC. As a matter of fact, the constitution which the UNC operate under, I was the one who was responsible for that.
Okay.
And therefore I did not see this government as a government which was UNC. What they are doing is not what are the aims and objects of the UNC. So I have maintained this is not a UNC-led government. And you would have noticed at the celebration of the UNC, or the so-called UNC in Rienzi Complex, neither the founder, Mr. Pandey, nor myself, we were there. As a matter of fact, Mr. Jack Warner has been very helpful in building the UNC too. While they were celebrating, Jack Warner, Ramesh Maraj, and Basir Pandey, Nizam Mohammed was in Shagonas doing a public education program on why people should have a say on the Privy Council. For example, the UNC policy has always been that you could not take away the final court for Trinidad and Tobago in England unless the people consent to it in a referendum. Prime Minister Kamala Prasad Biswas in April 2012, she said otherwise. She said her government will abolish appeals to the Privy Council. There'll be no referendum. So I'm telling you this for you to understand that I have decided a few months ago, about a year ago, I got a group of young people together and we formed an organization called Democracy Watch. I am the founder, and two persons spoke from Democracy Watch on Sunday, Amina Roland and Denzel Johnson. One is a lawyer and one is an insurance agent, right, an insurance expert. And that organization has been launched, and Democracy Watch will be conducting public education programs throughout the country over the next few months in order to fully inform the people of the issues of governance. For example, on Sunday, this Sunday, at 3 p.m. at Gaston Court in Shagonas, there'll be Democracy Watch will have a public education program on corruption, crime, and the economy. Mrs. Mary King will be speaking on the economy, and I will be speaking on crime and corruption, and there'll be some other speakers.
Regarding of corruption.
Yes, I'll be speaking on corruption.
Tell me about the corruption in this country, from my perspective. I want a clear understanding for what you think of that.
Corruption, official corruption, governmental corruption, is the greatest drawback to democracy. The reason for that is that monies which are to be used for the people are being put in the pockets of ministers or public officials or their agents or their families or relatives. What we have in Trinidad and Tobago over the last 4 to 5 years under this administration, you had corruption never before under the scale that you had it. As a matter of fact, contractors have come to me and have told me that they have to give a motor car, or they have to give land, or sometimes they have to give a townhouse in order to get a contract. And I could tell you of a lot of the people who have complained to me, even the ordinary people. The ordinary people, I go sometimes and drive into areas that I used to be an MP. I used to be a member of parliament of Cooper South and of Tabaquite. So I sometimes drive in those areas and I meet some of the people. And if you go into the community, you would find out that there are people who are getting CPEP contracts, who are related either to the member of parliament or to somebody in the government. And the other people who are deserving are not getting those contracts. And I have had persons who have come here to me complaining and want me to do something about it. But I told them I'm no longer an MP. And as a matter of fact, I'll give you, I'm not calling names, but I'll give you, a certain contractor is worried that he actually gave a bribe. He actually gave a bribe because he wanted a contract. But he's worried that if the government changes and their investigation, he could be charged. So I told him, well, you better come back to me when that happens. I could try and negotiate for you to be a state witness. I do not have evidence. I can't tell you whether I have the evidence. What I can tell you is that persons have come to me and have complained to me. Now, I, as an Attorney General, when there were allegations of corruption, even against the government, I believe that those allegations have to be investigated. Because you cannot be in government and refuse to investigate allegations of corruption. This Prime Minister and this government, they are not interested in investigating serious allegations of corruption. For example, any Prime Minister would have known what was happening in the Ministry of Sport. Any Prime Minister would know what was happening in the Ministry of the Attorney General. And any Prime Minister who saw that over $500 million was used in the payment of legal fees to recruit private lawyers would know that that on the face of it does not look right. Something is wrong and would investigate it. Any Prime Minister who sits down and condones that, you have to ask the question, why is it being condoned? Any Prime Minister who would have seen what has happened in NGC, with that sum of money being paid on public relations and that monies are being used in constituencies. So you have a question of state funds being used for party political purposes. So it seems to me that this government is quite prepared to condone the allegations of corruption, not prepared to investigate it. If you had something like Emailgate, a Prime Minister would appoint an independent investigator, would not want that to go to the police service of Trinidad and Tobago, would want an independent investigator. They have appointed commission of inquiry for trivial matters, but Emailgate was an independent investigator. Section 34. Section 34 implicates the entire cabinet, and the Prime Minister is behaving as if nothing was wrong in that. The former president of this country called the Prime Minister, wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, told the Prime Minister, that letter has been made public, that this needs answers for the population. It needs investigation. No investigation. What you have in Trinidad and Tobago is total condemnation of governmental corruption by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. The system we operate under in the Constitution is called responsible government. What that means in constitutional law is that the Prime Minister, as head of the Cabinet, head of the government, is responsible for all the wrongs which have been committed by the ministers. So when you look at the partnership government, you cannot distance the Prime Minister from what happened in this country. She is responsible. The remedy involves firing, but it does not only involve firing.
Right.
The remedy involves getting to the root of the allegations and taking steps to ensure that the minister is punished. You do not fire a minister and then gives them a job. Because most of them who get fired have a work. You think about all of them. I could think of all of them. I do not know of anyone who got fired has not got benefits and still on the payroll of the government or getting benefits.
Payroll?
Yes, he has a public service job. He has a public service job. So, but what about, I mean, what happened in the AG's ministry? Look how long it has taken, 5 years for her to act. You had a Solicitor General talking about it. You had all these allegations. So what the Prime Minister's strategy obviously is to give the population the impression that she is good, but she's surrounded by a lot of bad people, right? And she expects to fool the population with that. But in constitutional law and in reality, she is responsible, because in another country, she would have taken steps where you had what happened in the Ministry of Sport to have an independent investigation and for steps to be taken to bring the people to justice. She has had allegations that some of her ministers have a mall in Holland. Some have property in Canada. No steps have been taken by her to investigate these allegations. The government has all the machinery to investigate, but the machinery has become politicized. For example, the central authority in the AG's ministry have become politicized. So when you look at even the international index for corruption in Trinidad and Tobago, it shows that during the last 5 years, corruption in Trinidad and Tobago has increased.
Right. Two quick questions. The elections. Elections, I mean, supposed to be called at the end of the 5-year term. I think it's mid-May they got into office. If May comes and goes and she doesn't call election, is she breaking any laws by not doing this? Is there any type of, repercussions for her, not calling elections when it's constitutional?
Well, she'd be acting contrary to the intention and spirit of the Constitution, because it is not anticipated under the Constitution that government would function for 3 months before an election without a parliament. The parliament ends in June, on the date in June, I can't remember.
Right.
So the parliament ends. So if the Prime Minister decides that from June to September she will carry on the government and do not call election, what in effect she is doing, she is spending monies without having a function in Parliament. And the Parliament is the people's arena for accountability.
You can see this happening though?
It happened in St. Kitts, and it had to go to court. But it happened in St. Kitts, and there was a lot of public outcry. But I think that is the intention of the Prime Minister.
So in August we could have a government being run without parliamentary
without
supervision?
a function in Parliament.
So then I could
and
write
what they
whatever.
want to do is to spend the monies.
Yes.
They don't have to account. And then if there's a change of government, then you would know about it.
Right, but
So the whole purpose of constitutional governance in our country is that you'll always have Parliament for the government to account. And so although the Constitution provides that the election can be called in these circumstances in September, it is not anticipated that you would not have a functioning Parliament. And nothing they could do to extend the life of the Parliament from June. Nothing they could do. So we are faced with a situation, based on what the Prime Minister is saying, that she intends to govern this country for 3 months, use state funds, obviously for party political purposes and campaigning, and you, the people, cannot do anything about it. That is what she's telling the country.
He says it's close to the election, it makes no sense. The government says it's necessary to point out someone who's putting themselves up for the highest post in the land to be vetted. What's your take on this movement of censure?
My take on that is that the Prime Minister is misusing and abusing the functioning of Parliament. Parliament under the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago is to be used for the government to account to the people through the Parliament and for the opposition to scrutinize the government. It is not for the government to scrutinize the opposition. That is for your party convention outside in public meeting. So it is bringing the parliament into disrepute.
Politics.
As a matter of fact, she's using the parliament as Rienzi complex, as a Monday night forum. But like everything else, under her administration, most of the institutions have been demeaned. And the population should see it as it is. Every time that she does that, she is saying Parliament is in the same way as a Monday night forum or Rienzi complex. Or she's saying in the same way as she sees cabinet meetings to be held in the cabinet building, she wants to have it in a house in Philippines, right? So what we're seeing in Trinidad and Tobago is that a demeaning and a destruction of the traditions of governance and of the institution of government. But a second thing I want to tell you on this, what she's doing, however, she is in effect campaigning for Mr. Rowley. Because every time you use the parliament as a government to attack an opposition leader during an election campaign, what it does, it mobilizes the base of the party. So if you notice from the polls which have been published, 3 months ago, her poll rating was higher. And 3 months after, Rowley's rating is much higher. And the more she attacks Mr. Rowley and tries to get him out of the parliament, is the more the PNM base would be mobilized against her. As a matter of fact, I will tell you a piece of history. In 1995, when the UNC was about to have an election, the PNM was in government. They went and they decided, whoever it was, decided to lock up Mr. Pandey as opposition leader on a charge. Some lady made some allegation. And Mr. Pandey was arrested. That arrest caused the UNC to win the election. Because after that arrest, popularity went up and the UNC base was mobilized. So the greatest campaigner for Dr. Rowley is Kamla Prasad Bisesa.
Right, just write her a check. Okay, before I go, because we had to get out of here, one thing I wanted to ask, I kind of alluded to it earlier. Are you getting back into politics?
I have made up my mind that I have served my time in electoral politics. And if politics is to be a member of parliament or to even be a minister of government, I'm not interested. But what I am interested in informing and educating the people, and in particular the young people of our country. Because if we do not save Trinidad and Tobago, there'll be no future for the young people of Trinidad and Tobago. And what I would also like to do is that if it is at any time there is any genuine and serious move for persons who have been corrupt in government, in stealing the people's money, I am prepared to offer my experience and skill for those people to be convicted and for the fruits of their corruption to be brought back in the treasury of Trinidad and Tobago.
35% is the undecided vote. When you cut that number up, you realize it's the demographic between the 18 to 35 age group, that youth demographic, right? Obviously, from the polls that show the youth have a big part to play in this upcoming election, right? What is your take on the youths in terms of how they look at this election, how they need to interpret it, how important they should view themselves in this upcoming election?
Well, I think I'm in total agreement with you. Not only the youths have an important part, the youths could be very decisive for this election, as they were decisive in having Mr. Obama elected as the President of the United States of America. Today, the country is on the verge of collapse. We are on the verge of becoming a failed state. We are at a political precipice. This is the time for young people to become involved. And that is a motivating reason for me to be educating and informing people so that they can make the right choice. I am hoping that the young people would come forward and there are lots of things that can happen between now and the election time. The young people can come forward and assist in ensuring that the partnership government is not returned to power. And I feel very strongly about that, because if we have another 5 years of partnership governance in Trinidad and Tobago, there'll be no money for young people, there'll be no future for young people. We would be worse than Haiti.